Philippians chapter 4. I'd like to look at verse 11. When you have it where you are, smile and say amen. You just feel better when you smile. The Bible says, "Not that I speak in respect of want, for I have learned in whatsoever state I am, therewith to be content." I think we can read that again. "Not that I speak in respect of want, for I have learned in whatsoever state I am, therewith to be content." I want you to highlight or underline the words, "for I have learned." For I have learned. Highlight that, underline that, write it down. Remember, I have learned. The message for today: a blessing from a lesson. A blessing from a lesson. Sometimes we think of lessons as burdens, when in reality, there's a blessing in a lesson. And as we crossed into this new year, we must be careful that we do not make the false assumption that this year is going to be better simply because it is a new year. It is our sincerest hope and our desire in prayer that this might be a year that allows each of you to receive abundance and increase, health, love, peace, and all of the things that your heart desires. But if we are true to history, we recognize that so often another year goes by, and the realities from the previous year become the realities of the new year. And that's because we don't learn lessons, and so we have to repeat the course. Have you ever wondered why we are sometimes frustrated? Why can't life be easier in the new year? Why won't people treat us right? Why can't things be fair? Believers experience frustration when we buy into the narrative that we should be exempt from problems. If you think you're not going to have any problems this year, you're going to be frustrated because problems have your phone number, though you're not listed. And even if you have not forwarded your mail, headache and heartache know how to get a hold of you. Nothing is perhaps more frustrating than believing this is not supposed to happen to me. We not only get frustrated when we buy into that narrative, but we can also experience frustration when we believe that God has forsaken us. Much of what we go through is either designed by God or approved by God in his effort to shake us up, to get out of us what should not be in us. We often want God to pour into us as a vessel, but sometimes the vessel contains contaminants. And God has to empty and shake us and turn us upside down so that he can get out of us what should not be, so that he can pour into us what should. God has a design in shaping us, in maturing us, and in developing us. And as we look at this passage, in particular, when Paul says, "For I have learned," beloved, this mere statement, these few words that are not big and grandiose in any way, these simplistic words offer to us the riches of life-changing principles. Because "for I have learned" illustrates something so significant that we must not run past it. Here it is. We look at the portrait of Paul, a servant of God who had experiences not unlike our own. He was a servant who sometimes did not have the basic living needs of his life. You ever wondered how you're going to pay your rent and put food on your table? That was his experience. He was a servant who experienced the highs and the lows of life. There are times when things are well, folk treat you right, and everything seems to be in your favor. And then there are some times where you find yourself in the valley of despair, teetering on the brink of your own personal demise. Paul is a servant whose closest friends cared about him, but they lacked the provision and the opportunity to provide for him at his most critical time. Have you ever asked somebody for something and they say stuff like, "You should have caught me last week"? Paul is a servant who had to grapple with his own faith during times of personal insecurity. A servant who had to fight through natural human emotions when faced with needs and with wants. A servant who, like us, is trying to do right. And you find that in trying to do right, sometimes your struggle is great. And we know what it feels like to look upon sinful folk. Seem like they don't never get sick. They don't never catch a cold. Sinful folk who are able to prosper and enjoy the finer things of life. Sinful folk who seem to never have a problem. And yet we know that, like Paul, we are living for God. We're doing our best to be of service in his kingdom. And it seemed like the struggles are many, the problems are great, and there are no opportunities for us to escape the enemy's pursuing of us. We find ourselves wondering, why me, when sinful folks seem to be doing so well? Paul found himself, like us, beat up by life and beat down by circumstances. And he was a servant whose finances were in the red. He felt blue at times, and he had some dark days. I tell you, when you read the Bible, we can relate, and God has always seen fit to have a narrative, a biography of someone that relates to us so that we can see the power in his word to transform our lives and help us to get beyond our dark days. How does this servant Paul respond? What does he do in response to these difficulties? Lacking the basic needs of life, experiencing valleys, having to grapple with insecurity, facing difficulty and faith being tried, finances in the red, how does Paul respond? Do we see a person who walks around angry? You ever seen people who are just angry all the time, never happy about anything? The sun can be shining. They complain about the glare of the sun. It's too bright outside. They just angry and they don't want to feel better. They ain't going to feel better, and stop trying to make them feel better because they've got an angry spirit. Was Paul bitter? You ever be around folk who love to tell you what's wrong in their life? Woe is me. Everybody's against them. And anybody that'll listen to their sad story, they'll repeat it, and they'll tell their sad story because they've got a spirit of bitterness in them. Was Paul envious or jealous? There are times when we are lacking, when we are struggling, and we're not excited for everyone else, especially when we see that others are doing better. It's hard to be excited for somebody who is on a high when you're on the low. Very rarely do we look to the mountaintop when we're in the valley and praise God for those who are on top of the mountain. When we find ourselves in the valley of discouragement, in the valley of disillusionment, in the valley of despair, it is rare, if ever, that we look to the mountaintop and praise God for those who are on top of the mountain. When somebody else's family life is doing better, we're not happy for them, and from a human nature standpoint. When your car gets repossessed, you're not happy about somebody buying a new car. When you've been evicted, you're not happy generally about somebody buying a house. When someone finds love, you're not happy when at the same time your relationship is messed up. When someone else's child is graduating and going off to college, you're not happy when you find that your own child is in juvenile detention. When someone else comes to church wearing the finest in clothing and you recognize that you had to buy something off of a sale rack, or perhaps had to go to a flea market, or had to go to Goodwill or somewhere and buy lesser clothing, you're not necessarily happy for them. When others are talking about their grand vacation somewhere on a sunlit beach where golden sand is touching their skin and the radiant sun is providing them with a nice tan, you're not happy for them. Paul could have abandoned ship and said, I didn't have all of these problems until I became a Christian. Paul could have found himself being a person with a spirit of ridicule. A spirit of ridicule is a person who tries to make everybody else see that what they're happy about is not real. A spirit of ridicule is a person who can't wait to rain on somebody else's parade. A spirit of ridicule is that person who sees somebody having something going for them and they look for the dark side, they look for the problem, they look for the thing. And a person with a spirit of ridicule plants seeds of doubt. They get into other people's ear. A person who has a spirit of ridicule is the person that when another person has to confess sin or another person reveals a problem in their life, that person with the spirit of ridicule is the first to say, see, I told you. That's the person who's upset that someone else's marriage is going well. And so when that person stands up in church and says, "I'll pray for me, we're having some marital problems," and that's when that person with the spirit of ridicule says, "See, I told y'all don't know what goes on behind closed doors." See everybody going around thinking they such a happy couple, and look at their prayer requests today. The person with the spirit of ridicule is the person that when they see somebody advancing on their job, they're not happy, and if they should happen to get laid off, then they feel better. Because see, he ain't no better, she's no better than me. Look, they lost their job too. How did Paul respond? Was it anger? Was it bitterness? Was it envy? Was it jealousy? Did he abandon his post? Did he ridicule? No, my brothers and my sisters, Paul did something altogether different. He did not take a sinful response to his problem-plagued existence. Beloved, when I look at the words, "For I have learned," see him having done something altogether different. This is the difference between a person who must repeat a lesson because he has not learned and a person whose faith God will reward. This is the difference between a person who cannot understand why they continually go through the same things. A person who cannot understand why their experiences never change. A person who cannot understand why it is life does not give them more. They are always the victim. They are always in need of sympathy. They seek attention. They seek sorrow. They want someone to listen to their story. But then there are those like Paul who says, "I've learned." It's not about the lesson you should learn. It's "for I have learned." It's not what I think God is telling you. It's what I think God is telling me. It's not about what I think God needs to do to my enemy. It's what God is teaching me. He is saying here, "For I have learned," it's not a matter of God fixing my boss who laid me off, or God dealing with somebody who has harmed me. This is not his means of saying that it is what God is saying to someone else. He is saying that in whatever I have gone through, God has a lesson from me, and I have learned the lesson. I've been into something that I did not desire. I've experienced the lows of life. I've experienced the valleys. I've had some hard times and some headaches. I've had some misfortunes and some down times, and I'm not going to spend my existence trying to figure out what God needs to say to somebody else, for I have learned. Beloved, if you want to make this a banner year, if you want this to be an awesome year, if you want to see some outcomes better in your life than what you saw in 2020, if you want your existence to be a testament to the favor of God, if you want to be a recipient of grace and mercy, if you want to see more abundance and increase and better days in your life, you cannot orient your mind to what somebody else needs to know and what somebody else needs to figure out and what somebody else needs to learn and how somebody else needs to obey. You have to have the mindset, "For I have learned." This lesson is much too exhaustive to deal with in one message. And so for today, I want us to just consider how we learn. In future lessons, we will talk about what we learn, and we will talk about because we learn. Today, we need to just deal briefly with how we learn. I need us to recognize, as we look at Paul saying, "For I have learned," that we learn like him, number one, from life experiences. Again, life has some ups and some downs, some highs and some lows. What we must recognize is that neither the high nor the low, the up or the down, are arbitrary. Those are experiences where we need to learn. When we're up, we need to learn gratitude and how to give and serve others. When we're down, we need to learn how to trust God and how to develop character. When we go through things, we need to recognize that God not only instructs us in reading the Bible, but God instructs us in the experiences. When we read the Bible gives us an intellectual understanding. But all knowledge and all wisdom can't be taught. Some knowledge and some wisdom must be bought. Some knowledge, some wisdom can be taught, but some knowledge and even some wisdom must be bought. And I don't care how many digits you've got in your bank account or how high your credit score is, you cannot buy knowledge nor wisdom with your money or your credit. Some things that you buy, Visa and MasterCard, American Express, Discover can handle. But there are some things you can only buy through experience. Now, when we have experiences, here's where we get into trouble. And I want to challenge you, and I want you to ask yourself, is this you? I want you to be Judgment Day honest and raise your hand, raise both your hands and twinkle your toes if this is you. When we have life experiences, we have to be careful that we are not so emotional that we are not intellectual. Now, when I say intellectual, I'm not talking about college intellect. I'm not talking about professorial intellect. I'm not talking about you've got a degree, a certification intellect. That's not the type of intellect I'm talking about. But I can tell you, having worked for college, some of the smartest people I knew didn't have 8th grade educations. And some of the people who challenged me the most when it came to them not having common sense were folk with master's degrees and PhDs. And I don't say that to belittle education. I don't say that to put down anybody with any level of formal education. That's certainly not my position. I'm simply trying to illustrate that there is a difference between having book sense and having some life sense. Now, here's what happens when we have life experiences. We become so emotional that we are not intellectual. We are in a hurry to address how we feel. And instead of addressing how we feel, we need to learn to think through and not just try to get our emotions through it. See, when I'm hurt, when you're hurt, we get so busy trying to not feel hurt, not wanting to feel betrayed, not wanting to feel that life or someone got the best of us, that we become reactionary and we become a slave to how we feel, but we are not employing our senses to get through it and to learn the lesson from it. Now, if that's you, just smile and say amen. Raise your hands, twinkle your toes. What we want to do as humans is to change the facts. We need to learn how to face the facts. I need to say that again. When you are emotional, somebody does you wrong in a relationship, somebody does you wrong in church, somebody does you wrong on your job, something happens in life, you get a bad diagnosis from the doctor, the stock market is not working in your favor, your children, your grandchildren are not acting right. Whatever those problems are, we develop instantaneously an emotional response. I'm angry I lost money. I'm angry I lost my job. I'm angry I'm not married, or I'm angry my spouse mistreated me. I'm angry my children or grandchildren are not acting right. I'm angry that folk in the church ain't right. I'm angry about this. I'm angry about that. I'm angry with him. I'm angry with her. All of that anger does nothing to solve your problem. It just helps you to have a feeling. Instead of trying to change the facts, we need to have the mindset to face the facts so that we can handle those things, lest our emotions start handling us. The Bible teaches us in Proverbs 23:7, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. We have to make sure that my thinking is right, because my outcomes will not be right if I don't have the right thinking. My outcomes are going to be the same. Whatever didn't go well in your life in 2020, whoever didn't treat you right, whatever circumstances happened to you, if you don't develop a thought process going forward that is healthy and constructive, your 2021 may just be a carbon copy of 2020, not because 2021 can't be better, but if your thinking is not better, then your results cannot be better. Let me help us with this. Psalms 46, verse 10. I'm trying to teach us how we learn. We learn from experiences when we go through things. There's a word there in Psalms 46, verse 10 that'll bless you. There's a blessing, beloved, in the lessons of life. And I want you to get this, because I want you to have a banner year. I want this to just be an awesome year for you. In Psalms 46 and verse 10, the Bible says, "Be still and know that I am God." See, when you are emotional, you're all frazzled and razzled and dazzled. Sometimes you need to just be still. Come back to your center point. Get calibrated again. Get back to where you need to be. Your emotional response knocks you off course. When you're frustrated, you're not on your center point. When you are frustrated, when you're angry, when you're bitter, when you're confused, when you're envious, when you're jealous, when you're ridiculing, you're not at your center. Sometimes you need to just be still and know the Lord. Well, brother preacher, I'm a doer. I got to do something. That might be the problem. See, sometimes you do stuff and you make it worse than if you had not done anything. I had a person criticize me once, saying, doing nothing is the wrong thing to do. I said, you've not read the Bible. Sometimes doing nothing is the best thing to do. When you don't know what to do, you need to be still. Well, brother preacher, what do I do when I'm being still? Let me show you a mental process that will help you. Again, you don't have to have a PhD. You don't have to have gone to college. You might not be able to read well and comprehend well. That's all right. Don't allow your school inability to affect your natural mental ability. See, there's natural mental ability and there's school ability. And too many people beat themselves up because they can't read or write or they can't comprehend well in terms of school. But that doesn't make you any less. Here's how you think. Here's your natural thinking ability. When you go through something, I'm trying to bless you. When you go through something, make an assessment of the facts. That's number one. You ever notice when we go through something, we don't discuss facts, we discuss how we feel. We're not ignoring how you feel, but what are the facts? Let's set aside our emotions, because if we're going to solve a problem, what are the facts? For example, if you lose your job and you're emotional and you're upset, how can that company let me go? I gave my life to that company. I gave my best years. I went in early. I left late. I skipped lunches. I did this. I did that. That's how you feel. But that's not going to solve your problem. What are the facts? What potential do you have? What resources? What opportunities? Because sitting there whining and complaining about what they did to you is not going to make them call you back and reinstate you. When you have a problem, get outside of your feelings and say, what are the facts? Now, when we say what are the facts, be careful that your facts are not what should be. Your facts is what is. Because see, some people don't struggle with emotion so much as they do idealism. Well, they base it on, well, this is in a perfect world. Well, this is what should be. We're not talking about what should be. We're talking about what is. So in our being still, I'm trying to help us to get to this point where we can say, for I have learned, what are the facts? Second, think through your choices, your options. One of the things I have discovered in counseling people, no matter what the problem is people fall into one of two categories. Either they don't think they have any other option. That's category one. Ain't nothing else can be done. Or category two are those people who are so narrowly focused on one or two options that they can't think through 10, 15, 20 other possibilities. As an example, my children have heard me say this. You can research this on your own, but my children have heard me say this story to them more than once. I've talked to them about WD-40. Y'all know what WD-40 is. That's stuff we spray on stuff when we can't loosen up a boat, when the car door is squeaking. We run and get some WD-40 for a whole lot of things. And the WD stands for water displacement. But the reason why they call it 40, and this is a true story, this is not a preacher's tale, is because when they tried the formula, they failed 39 times. They got the formula right on the 40th try. What would have happened if they had stopped at 10 or 20 or 30? So what I'm saying to you is that when you have a problem in life, get you some paper and a pen and just start brainstorming and thinking through what are the facts and then what are some choices or some options. Don't stop at 1 or 2. Don't stop at 10. Don't stop at 30. Stop when there is a choice or an option that is absolutely the best choice or option. But the minute you stop thinking that you have options is the minute you become defeated. So people fall into two categories: those who think they have no options whatsoever, or those who are just limited. It can only be one or two things. Learn to think through, exhaust yourself by saying, this is my problem. What are my options? Brainstorm, be still, and think through some options. As you're being still, develop courage and faith to act. Some people can come up with some solutions, but then won't try anything. People are scared of two things. Some folk are afraid of failure. They're afraid that they won't succeed. They're afraid somebody's going to laugh at them. They're afraid that the risk is not worth the reward. Be careful that you don't fall in that category. But then there are some people who are afraid of success, because success means I have to be stretched. Success means I have to do something different. Success may mean something. I'm going to say this and somebody ain't going to like it, but that's all right. Sometimes success means you've got to change your crowd. Do you know that where you are in life and where you are going, sometimes you have to leave some folk behind? Everybody can't be with you on your continued journey. Because as you're going to another level, everybody else is not trying to go to that level. Now, I'm not saying that you develop a snooty, uppity personality. I'm not saying forget where you've come from. I'm not saying look down on people. And I don't want anybody to say, well, that's what Brother Preacher is talking about. What I am saying to you is that sometimes in success, you have to be willing to associate with some people who can help you, and you might have to disassociate with some people who can't help you. Every now and then, my brother called me and tell me about someone that we knew back in the day. He ran into him in a store or the mall or somewhere, and he said, they'll ask about me. And I'll ask him, well, what are they doing? What are they up to? And they's doing the same stuff they was doing 20, 30 years ago. And I always say to my brother, well, next time you see them, I want you to tell them that I live in Egypt or Africa somewhere. Just tell them I moved to the continent of Africa. And I say that lightheartedly, but I say it to say, some folk I just don't want to be bothered with. Some folk, the conversation in 2021 is the same conversation we was having in 1991. They've not grown. They're into the same thing that they were into 20, 30 years ago, and I'm trying to go to the next level of life, and they're so comfortable in a shallow point in life, and I just find I don't want to be bothered. They still trying to figure out how to get over, how to scheme, how to scam, how to do this, do that. Listen, at some point you've got to grow, and in order to grow, you have to learn how to disassociate with folk who are holding you back and keeping you down, and you've got to align yourself with some folk who are doing things on another level, and you've got to be courageous enough and confident enough and secure enough that you can let go of folk you're comfortable with and move on towards some people who can challenge you, who can help you, who can encourage you, and who can teach you some stuff. You cannot act on another level by continually being with folk who are still trying to stay where they are. And I know folk will argue with me back and forth. Well, Brother Gibbs, they keep it real, and they've been, hey, that's between you and the Lord. If you comfortable with that, if you okay with that, you don't have to argue your point to me. You don't have to justify a position to me. I'm just trying to tell you that in life, if you want to go to a next level, sometimes folk you got to leave behind who ain't trying to go there with you. As you're being still so that you can get to that point of for I have learned, you have to also own your choices and the consequences of those choices. Many people will never get to a greater level because it's never their fault. It's always, I'm not happy because of, I'm not successful because of, I'm not conquering because of. People spend their life trying to figure out who to blame for every problem they have. At some point, you have to be in control of you. Could you imagine Paul in Philippians 4, instead of saying, for I have learned, Paul blaming everybody else for what's wrong with him? God gave him the ministry to the Gentiles. Could you imagine Paul saying, I would have been successful, but them Gentiles don't appreciate me. I would have been successful, but, the Jews, they just ain't working with me. Could you imagine him saying, instead of saying, I have learned, that Paul takes the position that, life would be better, but I just can't get over the fact that Demas has forsaken me. I just can't get over that. I just can't get over the fact that, me and Barnabas was close. And we had a disagreement about John Mark, and now I can't do what I could have done because Barnabas took Mark's side, and so, I would be better if Barnabas had stuck with me, but he went with Mark. So, I guess that's why I'm messed up. People spend too much of their time trying to figure out who to blame. Listen, when you make a choice, own your choice and own the consequences. Your life will be so much better. You will experience so much more when you're not angry and bitter at everybody else for your life. And the folk you angry and bitter with are on the other side of town going to sleep and ain't thinking about you. So you have given power and control to people who obviously didn't mean you well. When I was in college, I took a psychology class, and my professor had a chipped tooth. And she mentioned to us that she will never get her chipped tooth fixed. And she said the reason why is because in her previous marriage, she was a victim of domestic violence. And she shared that he hit her one day in the mouth and it chipped her tooth. And she said she vowed never to get the chip fixed because it was her means of being reminded that that man hit her in the mouth. If that worked for her, fine. I can't say if I would do that myself. My point to you is that sometimes we're so busy reminding ourselves what we should be angry about instead of finding a means to get up when we've been knocked down. Now, if that worked for her, I'm not taking that away from her. Maybe that's what she needed. But don't set up reminders to be angry. Put yourself in a position to get up when life has knocked you down. There's an author by the name of Dr. Caroline Leaf. L-E-A-F, Dr. Caroline Leaf. And she wrote a book called Switch on Your Brain. Dr. Caroline Leaf, Switch on Your Brain. And what she does in this book is that she takes a practical, a medical, and a biblical thought of our brain process and intertwines that. And she very skillfully illustrates that the practical, the medical, and the biblical aspect of brain functioning are interrelated. She says, as we think, we change the physical nature of our brain. As we consciously direct our thinking, we can wire out toxic patterns of thinking and replace them with healthy thoughts. Let me say that again from Dr. Caroline Leaf, the book Switch on Your Brain. As we think, we change the physical nature of our brain. As we consciously direct our thinking, we can wire out. This is what I want you to hear. As we consciously direct our thinking, see, you have to be in charge of your thinking. As we consciously direct our thinking, we can wire out toxic patterns of thinking and replace them with healthy thoughts. Do you know what a pattern is? My grandmother, my mother, they enjoyed sewing. And we would go to these fabric stores. We have a sister here, Sister Bentley. She's sews. And we would go to these fabric stores as kids. And they would look in these books and see a dress or an outfit or whatever. And they had these drawers, and you had to get the number out the book and look on the drawer that had that number and pick out the pattern. And they would go home and spread this pattern all over the table. And it just looked like some old crumply paper with some drawings on it and some numbers and all of that. And they would lay fabric over it and cut around it and pin this up and stitch this together and do what you do when you make an outfit. And every time they would make an outfit, it would look exactly like what was in the book because they followed the pattern. And when you follow the pattern, you get the same result. What Dr. Leaf is trying to tell us is that we have some toxic patterns in our thinking. Those toxic patterns is that when I don't find success in life, I'm not going to say, for I have learned. I'm going to say, God needs to fix my boss. God needs to fix my spouse. God needs to fix my ex. God needs to fix whoever. When I have toxic patterns, I feel angry. Toxic patterns is that I'm jealous, I'm bitter, I'm envious. Toxic patterns is I'm going to give up. A toxic pattern is that I'm going to ridicule. I'm going to rain on somebody else's parade. Dr. Leaf is saying we need to consciously direct our thinking so that we wire out, we get rid of toxic patterns and replace them with healthy thoughts. Beloved, we've got to move to close, but I want to ask you, what are some toxic patterns that you have in your life? And if you continue with those toxic patterns, I don't care if you see 2021, I don't care if you see 3021, your outcomes cannot be different with the same toxic patterns. You have to get to a point where you understand there is a blessing in the lesson. Paul says, for I have learned. I wish that this lesson would resonate with people So many times as a preacher, folk have problems with everybody else. They don't like anybody, anything. They probably don't like themselves. And it's always somebody else's fault that they are unhappy. What are your toxic patterns? How do you get to a point where you say, for I have learned? For I have learned. Whatever has happened in my life, I'm not going to be angry. I'm not going to be bitter. I'm not going to be envious. I'm not going to be jealous. I'm not going to abandon my post that God has given me. I'm not going to ridicule. I'm not going to talk about others. For I have learned. Beloved, I do not believe as we close that you have to wait till you die to get some peace. When I see rest in peace on a cemetery grave, on a headstone that is, I wonder how many of those folks lived in peace. Be still. Think through your problems. Stop trying to address how you feel. Don't change the facts. Face the facts. Make an assessment of the facts. Think through your choices and your options. Develop courage and faith in acting. And own your choices. Don't blame nobody else for what's happening in your life. Because every time you blame somebody else, what you are saying and don't realize you're saying is that I have surrendered to them. If I cannot be happy, have peace, have joy, have contentment, if I can't succeed, if I can't achieve, if I can't experience victory or triumph because of them, I have surrendered my will to them. I've surrendered my peace to them. I've surrendered my life to someone who has demonstrated they don't have my best interests at heart. Now, here's the question. How does that make you look? How does that make me look when somebody has demonstrated that they don't have our best interests at heart and we blame them, meaning we've surrendered to them? When you have a lesson, there's a blessing in your lesson. You need to be in charge of you. For I have learned. Not y'all have learned. Not y'all need to learn. For I have learned. It is my prayer, my desire, my hope that 2021 is going to be your year. But willing that and wanting that, it's not going to bring about change. You have to be the one to think different and say, I've learned. Or else 2021 will be a pattern that just repeats itself. What are the lessons you need to learn? Paul says, for I have learned. Have you learned? So we close this message. Hope something has been said to stir your minds, to get you out of your feelings and on a path to a healthier outcome. We will be praying for your learning. We will be praying for your blessing.